Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Paradigm Shift podcast. I'm Niki Kiiskinen, and
And
I'm here
I'm
with my co-host.
I'm Eric Joseph. Greetings,
And
greetings.
good thing we didn't talk over each other whatsoever there.
Yeah, nonsense. We're professionals. We don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Today we're going to have a very relaxing, chill chat about some Eastern philosophers.
Like normal people.
Uh, well, we're normal people, arguably, so this is something that normal people do.
Yes. Hey, you want to discuss some Eastern philosophy for 50 minutes? Oh, sure. That sounds like a great hobby.
Well, I am of that opinion.
Fair enough.
So, what do you know about Confucius? So we have some,
There's
background information.
he's the butt for a lot of jokes. I know that.
Really?
Yeah,
Uh,
the types where it's like Confucius says, and then it's something like slightly racist, but very like the basic wisdom.
okay. Well, I wasn't aware of these jokes, but so I guess I'm the uncultured one here. But
Right.
yep. So the in the 6th century to 221 BC in China, there was a period known as the Hundred Schools of Thought,
I see.
because there were tons of different philosophies and schools that were flourishing and more or less in competition with each other. A broad range of thoughts and ideas were being developed and discussed freely. So, for that reason, it's sort of considered the golden age of Chinese philosophy.
Right, I see. Was there a
So,
hundred of them?
uh, there were about 100.
Probably where
No,
it
there were
gets the name.
there were a lot. I don't think there probably weren't exactly 100. That would be a pretty crazy coincidence.
Well, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? That's some false advertising.
Misnomer, misnomer. Outrageous naming decision in that case.
That could get you sued now.
Yeah, so, mm, well, I mean, false advertisement, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said.
Yep, so this was during the spring and autumn period and the warring states period of ancient China.
Right.
Yep, so in the earlier first millennium BC, so
Hmm.
1000 BC to 700 BC, the Zhou or Zhou dynasty, however you want to pronounce it, was reigning, but they that was sort of their height. But even though this technically still falls under the Zhou dynasty, they didn't have much power,
Yeah, I hear war was generally a common theme in history. It's something that happened a lot.
especially in China.
Yeah, I am just on fire with these observations.
I know. They were united, and then they split apart into a million states, and then they were united, and then they split apart into a million states.
Hmm. Bit of on again, off again.
What was that YouTuber's name? Bill Wirtz. That
Bill
right?
Words, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's got he basically puts it very well, very concisely in those videos. You've seen them.
I've seen them. Everyone's seen them. Who hasn't seen
Ev-
them?
Who hasn't? If you haven't seen them, shout out to Bill Wirtz. If you haven't seen History of the Entire World, I guess,
Yeah,
or History of
look,
Japan, you're missing out.
everyone knows that small up and coming channels like Bill Words need a little boost from us big guys up here.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, a few shout outs, a little bit of help every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, we gotta help support those up and coming channels
Yep, he's gonna
because
make it big.
sometimes they just don't get the amount of attention they deserve.
Yeah, exactly. You get me. You get. Me.
Okay, we don't have infinite time here
We
because
do
there's
not.
actually quite a bit of content to cover. So, I mean, 100 schools of thought is quite a bit of content, wouldn't you agree?
We could make 100 episodes out of that.
We could, but we're not gonna, because that is,
No, don't.
um, yeah. Just to name a few, well, there's legalism, Taoism, Moism, It would be a challenge to cover all of them, even if we had a lifetime for it, to be honest.
I've heard
Every
one of
single
those.
detail, study all the ancient texts. So so let's just start with arguably the most influential body of thought with the most enduring effects on Chinese life. So Confucianism,
Hmm.
founded by who would have thought Confucius.
Incredible.
And if we have time, we'll move on to Greek, Hellenic, and Hellenistic philosophy. But I don't think we'll have time in this episode, so that would be for next time.
Amazing. You're already plugging our next show.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. If you wanna be here for this thrilling conclusion, you better be around next week.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of people have more knowledge about Greek philosophy than they do about Eastern philosophy, probably because we live in the West. So that would be, well, in the quote unquote West, because East and West,
Right? Yeah.
they seem a bit arbitrary, but
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Western people in history seem to care a lot less about Eastern people's price. I mean, look at how little shit Japan gets for World War II.
that's fairly true. I mean, I'm sure they do, but comparably not as much. Or we just don't see it or experience it because we live in Europe.
Yeah, I just realized I evolved this podcast from a family-friendly podcast to a PG-13 podcast.
Good choice. Or I mean, I don't know how. What does that affect?
uh, because I swore once, and in PG-13 movies, you're allowed to drop one f-bomb.
Oh, I didn't even notice you swear.
Well,
Okay, fine.
I can't repeat it again, otherwise we'll get an M rating.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Confucius, he was born in 551 BC, about, and died in about 479 BC. So some years before the Warring States period. So he mainly lived during the spring and autumn period. And his he liked antiquity. He would look back at the early days of the Zhou dynasty and see an ideal socio-political order from that.
He was an ancient hipster.
Yes, that's
guys,
exactly.
guys,
I mean,
this whole war thing, this the way you're running this is way too mainstream.
yeah, I mean, it's funny thinking about ancient peoples and how they also had their own concepts of ancient,
These kids
because
these
for them,
days,
their time was
these
modern.
kids these days, they are way too reliant on paper from our paper maker. I mean, like back in my day,
Back in our day, we passed all information forward orally. We didn't have paper.
are these
Yep.
kids gonna learn to draw on slates? They're gonna get chalk everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So that was Confucius in a nutshell. he
Uh,
beli-
okay, we're done with him already.
Yep. No. That's sort of his. He embodies the ancient hipster
I see.
characteristic. I think that's a good way of putting it. So um, he believed that the only effective system of government necessitated prescribed relationships for each individual, and that's a fairly large part of Confucianism. So there was this idea that let the ruler be a ruler and the subject a subject. He thought kings had to be virtuous in order to rule properly, and that the functions of government and social stratification were facts of life to be sustained by ethical values. His ideal human was what he called a junzi, which is translated as gentleman or superior person. Now, we're going to go into more detail about all of these, but I just wanted to throw some ideas in there so you have some kind of concept about what kind of ideals he had.
Right, yeah, I can't really argue with any of that for sure.
Yeah, but as I said, he is basing this on what in his mind is antiquity. So he made the claim that he was a transmitter rather than a maker. He was just sort of giving a sort of rebirth to these older ideas that there was precedent already from antiquity, especially during the height of the royal Zhou earlier in that millennium.
He
And
only
and
listens to 80s in. By 80s, I mean 480.
He was like, "Oh man, I can't believe I was born in the wrong generation."
I know, right? Ugh, kids these days are so entitled.
I mean, you're not far off the mark there. But that definitely influenced other ancient thinkers to some extent in China to being more accepting of his ideas. So even back then, there was precedent matters or mattered, right?
Hmm?
But that doesn't mean we should regard the content of his texts as consisting of old ideas, because much of what Confucius taught does appear to have been original to him and to have represented even quite a radical departure from the ideas and practices of his day.
Right.
So I think maybe in a way he was just justifying himself there.
That's fair. That's fair.
Or I mean, he did. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't actually value the ideals. He got a lot of inspiration from much older texts. So so how do we know what we know of Confucius? It's you go ahead if you have any ideas.
History.
History. That's probably
That's my answer. I'm locking it in for $500.
yeah, I can't say that's incorrect, but we have the text or the primary sort of text that were written about him are called the Analects, or in Chinese, Lun Yu. And I'm going to be referencing them a lot with one of those names, Analects or Lun Yu. And they were supposedly written by his followers,
Right.
starting from around his death, but they weren't finished until hundreds of years later. So lots of, as with many ideologies, Confucianism was being um, contributed to by lots of different philosophers in his time, and after hundreds of years later, people were reading up on his ideas and contributing to them and changing them. We're going to be or we're going to try to mainly focus on the things that Confucius himself believed, sort of stay in the correct chronological zone.
Right. So tell me more about China Jesus,
China Jesus.
because he
Is
has
that
disciples.
yeah. Yeah, I mean he had pupils, he had followers, he had disciples, but that doesn't why is that like a defining characteristic of Jesus?
Because he had disciples. Therefore, correlation.
Okay. Maybe I misspoke. Not
They share one
it,
trait.
it
Therefore,
might it can even if it weren't or even if it was a defining characteristic, that's not the definition of Jesus, is it?
look. But they share one character trait. Therefore, they are identical by all means.
Jesus, the property of having disciples.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm just gonna ignore that and we're gonna move on.
Mm-hmm.
So
You just
Confucius,
can't face the truth.
we're we're gonna we're gonna talk about Confucius's social philosophy, some of his political philosophy, his thoughts on education because they were somewhat revolutionary, and then how they compared to, or a little bit about how those ideas compared to some of those other ideologies or bodies of thought that I alluded to earlier,
Hmm.
specifically Moism, because that is actually the main competitor to Confucianism throughout ancient China.
Ooh, ideology fights.
Yes, well, fairly common practice among philosophers is fighting. I've heard.
Won me at five. The ideology.
Yep, that's a pretty accurate characterization. So let's start from social philosophy,
Right. What is
which
that?
basically, yeah. So what is social philosophy? Is
Well,
that
I'm
your
glad you
question, or is
asked.
what was? Were you asking me what social philosophy is, or what his social philosophy is?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
I don't know. I'm not aware of this reference.
Not a reference, it's a saying.
I'm not aware of this saying.
That's because
Did you
you're
say
dumb.
combi?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Oh, column A. I thought. I blame your pronunciation or
I
your mic.
I blame your
Or
face.
okay. Well, as the name suggests, philosophy would be philosophy that is involved with society. So, how people should act in society, what leads to living a good life, stuff like that. Philosophy that is involved in the social aspects of philosophy. And to Confucius, this was based on these twin concepts of Ren and Li, which roughly translate to benevolence and propriety.
I
So
knew that.
Ren, well, I don't expect you to speak Chinese. Don't worry, I've got you covered in that. No, that's not to mean I speak Chinese. That's just that I have the translations here.
Wow, I can't believe you can speak Chinese.
I wish. And nowadays, it's a really useful skill to have to be able to speak Chinese.
Indeed. China is gonna
Mandarin
from me.
China would be a superior lingua franca to English. Discuss.
That's a fancy big word right there. Like, not even English. I feel outclassed.
Good response. Yeah, lingua franca, just like language of the frank is what it translates to, but it basically just means like a worldwide language, a standard language that people would kind of share so they can communicate with each other, even when their mother tongue is different.
Right. No, that makes the sense. Continue.
That's your opinion on whether Mandarin Chinese is a superior lingua franca
Oh, that's a
than
that's a
English.
that's a good question actually. I mean, is it? It's very complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated and not for this episode, but
Chinese
uh,
is a very difficult language. I know from experience.
well, there's that argument, I suppose. Uh, Simply in the sense of populations, whatever. Social. So let's start from Ren. So benevolence.
I have spilled water all over myself.
Why have you done this?
It's not intent. Are you trying to say it was intentional?
I'm trying to say it was foolish.
Of course, it was foolish. It wasn't.
Are you good? Can I keep going?
Continue.
Okay. Uh, so Ren slash Gen, because I have no idea how to pronounce it, and many different spellings are used of the romanization, is the concept of compassion, benevolence, or loving others.
Right.
So Confucius argues that what makes man distinctively human, the property that gives human beings their humanity, is Ren. So just the ability to um, love each other, benevolence, being kind.
Uh, wouldn't that also apply to like pets?
What makes pets distinctively human is
I
that they can love people. I mean, they well,
mean,
that's that's a
dogs.
I mean that's a solid counter argument already.
Yeah, dogs, like, for example, definitely have the capability of, loving someone and, like, being kind towards.
That's actually interesting. I don't know if dogs have the ability to uh love thy neighbor. That's what is a dog experiencing with its when it's like happy to see its owner and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, affection, probably. Dopamine and
Probably some
everything.
kind of affection. Is it kindness or benevolence? Does it count as that?
Is, does it do. I mean,
Does your pet do you favors?
uh,
Sacrifice its own self-interest for
if.
you?
If I had a dog and I like told it to fetch and trained a little, it would probably go and like fetch. It'd be a good boy. He would like it. He would want to do that.
I can train him to do me favors.
Well, I mean, it's not even training. It's like genetically we've like pre just like modified dogs genetically to like be
Fair,
predisposed
fair.
to liking those things and wanting to do those types of things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dogs are tamed, so they're not really they're not remotely wild anymore.
Hmm. So
But
I'd say if it's like a natural instinct from birth, then I would consider that the emotion equivalent.
hmm well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to characterize benevolence or compassion in other animals, but I don't think that would be what I would uh, pick as a defining characteristic of humanity. If I had to choose one, I'd pick rationality.
Yeah,
But
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 then
that's
then your competitors become dolphins and elephants, and then you're in a whole different room.
yeah, they're intelligent doesn't mean we're vastly more intelligent than they are. I guess that's a concept for why humans uh what Confucius is thinking about here. Perhaps we have the just a vastly superior ability to be benevolent or compassionate.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. But um
I mean, I guess
I
it comes
mean,
down to
are
the
you okay, but are you less human if you're not kind? Are you less human if you're mean and evil?
well. I mean, I don't know about mean and evil, but if you're less kind, I guess that like leads into the topic of like psychopathy and everything. Uh, I mean, I wouldn't say that it makes you less
Not even
human.
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't say it necessarily makes you less human if you're, a mean person. That's, I mean, obviously a part of human characteristics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the first thought that came to mind when I read this. That he considered benevolence, compassion, loving as what makes man distinctively human. The
Yeah.
first thought that came to mind is so if a man is not benevolent, compassionate, or loving, they are not human. They are less human.
Also, let's take one step back because there's something I still wanted to argue about,
I wasn't
like,
sure I agreed about that. Yeah.
but like, I mean, the whole like compassion and kindness things come from the fact that humans obviously are social creatures. They learned to work together when they came out of
Mm,
trees from like apehood, and I feel like there's animals that obviously show similar traits. Like, look at wolf packs; they
yeah,
hunt
yeah.
together because they're beneficial towards each other, which makes them exhibit quote unquote kindness towards each other as they help each other.
Fair, fair. I mean, it's always based on some level of self-interest because it's you simply can't successfully hunt unless you're doing it in a pack, and then that means that you die because you don't manage to catch any prey.
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's necessary for survival, therefore it becomes an instinct, evolution. But
yeah, same for people. I guess that's the theory for why we
left the trees.
or where we supposedly get like kindness from.
I mean,
Yeah, we left the trees.
yeah. But then we can go back to the whole, what you were saying about how mean people are still human. Obviously, I feel like what Confucius is trying to say that like kindness and benevolence is what makes you like the most human, like peak human. I feel like
That's probably a good way of putting it.
yeah, he means like I feel like he means like the perfect humanity would be a person who's like benevolent and kind and everything.
Mm. I mean, it's a good interpretation because you're always going to run into problems with interpretation with these ancient texts and how, I was talking to you before the broadcast about how the problems with these old texts is so often that they focus much less on argumentation and making their points sort of logically apparent to the reader, and more so on these analogies and painting this sort of artistic picture from which you're supposed to be able to draw the conclusions yourself.
Right, yeah, of course. I mean, topics like this always require a bit more analysis than normal because I mean, when you look at art, 90% of art is like you have to get your own viewpoint of it. You have to get your own conclusions from it, and I guess
Yeah,
that's a lot
yeah.
of what old philosophy is. It's just the presentation of a slightly artistic-ish like point of view towards humanity and like society, or you have to derive your own like understanding of said, well, not arguments, but the claims, I guess.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And, that's yeah. I mean, that's one reason why when we get into education later, Confucius is really into arts and stuff. Well, not extremely. He's more interested in morality than he is in arts, but he draws a lot of, he sees a lot of examples of morality and wise, life lessons in old songs and art and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah,
But
exactly.
yes, but regardless of whether we think that the peak humanity, that you are at a lower level of humanity if you are not benevolent. That is what he thinks, and he thinks humanity is the most significant of those virtues, or benevolence is the most significant of those virtues in a person, that in reaching peak humanity. So,
Right.
and he thinks all other virtues follow from benevolence, from what he calls Ren.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like what I was saying.
Yep, he says that Ren is dearer than life itself. That though it's what makes life worth living, it's something that you should sacrifice your life to maintain if necessary.
Right. That is understandable from a social standpoint.
Yep. So I guess that what that means more, I mean, sacrificing yourself in order to maintain benevolence. Can you think of an example of what that would be?
I mean, self-sacrifice in the form of, I guess. I mean, I guess like in modern society, and I guess in all of society, you're sacrificing your time to work to help
Mhm.
society. And I mean, sure, you get you know recompensation for it, but I feel like time, at least in my values, is such an important thing that money is just that compensation.
Yeah. It's
But
interesting, and I'm not sure exactly what interpretation you should have from this as well. Something you sacrifice your life to maintain benevolence, as in you should sacrifice your life in benevolence, or as in when benevolence is threatened, you should sacrifice your life to maintain it. Because I'm that's hard to envision a situation where the concept of benevolence is somehow under threat in society.
right, yeah, can't really think
I
of
don't
anything
know.
for that either.
Regardless, um, yep. So he has Ren is supposed to be this sense for the dignity of human life, a feeling of humanity towards others, but also self-esteem for yourself. And it applies to all men, not just one nation or race. It's the foundation of all human relationships, in Confucius's opinion.
Right,
So, and this is an important characterization to mention, is that it does seem that there is this belief that Ren can be obtained, that there is a natural perfectibility of man.
right, of course.
Yeah. So that's something in the text that is apparent.
Yeah, that's generally like a thing in a lot of ideologies, mostly Eastern ones, isn't it? Like the perfect state.
Yeah, like it's possible to achieve perfection, and I guess that's where that peak humanity you were talking about earlier comes from as well. So, uh, in order to reach peak humanity, you need to be benevolent, and not only that, but benevolence is the most important factor in reaching peak humanity, perfection.
Right.
And that's the first principle of Confucianism, to act according to Ren. It's the ultimate guide to human action.
You see,
He rejects the way of human action One satisfies likes and avoids dislike.
Humanity for Dummies.
Mm-hmm.
Full guide.
You, humanity for dummies. Well, that's what we're doing, but and we're sort of starting from I wouldn't say this is. I mean, it's clearly not the first place where humanity, or yeah, I can't say that it's the first place where humanity was ever discussed, but it's one of the first that we have, sources for. Because if you just go too far back in time, you simply don't have texts that you can read on philosophy, on
Right, yeah.
politics.
Of course. Yeah, I get what you mean. There's like obviously like really ancient philosophers who we know existed and we understand their like vague like main concepts, but there's no like remaining scripture that we could read from.
Hmm. I mean, there's no way for us to know who the first philosopher was. I mean, completely possible that people that were considering philosophy and such a very, very long time ago before any written records existed completely orally. In fact, I'd consider it likely. And there's no point in even well, there's maybe some point to considering it, but it's just a complete it's a huge time investment for us to go all the way back to like ancient pre-ancient times to start off our quest in philosophy. So we're starting in like first millennium BC, and I think that's pretty good because again, this is roughly the time period where the first sort of political thought came in philosophy.
Right, that does make sense.
In
This
some
is
ways, China was a bit of a forerunner because they say it was the first centralized state.
well,
I'm not sure about the truth of that statement.
China was a forerunner in a lot of things.
Yeah, until it wasn't, and then it was again.
Exactly, that's the story of
History in
Asia.
a nutshell. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. In a way, it is sort of the story of Asia too. But let's not get into that.
Yep,
Let's keep moving forwards.
Just assume the Asians did it first, unless they didn't.
Yep, good plan. I think you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and this is very interesting. This next thing. So, for Confucius, such concern for others is demonstrated through the practice of forms of the Golden Rule. I'm sure you've heard of the Golden Rule, but do you remember what it is?
I do not remember what it is. Is it the
Yep. So
treat others the way you want to be treated?
exactly.
I did
Do unto others how you would like to be done by, or something like that.
I did not realize
Um,
that was by Confucius. I assumed that was just something that like popped up in some sort of school or something in like the 1800s.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily Confucius's, obviously. I mean, it popped up in a lot of different religions and ideologies, but definitely way before the 1800s. I mean, it's even in Christianity. Matthew chapter 7,
Right.
verse 12,
Yeah.
is also mentions the golden rule. I'm sure a lot of people, semi simultaneously, came up with it themselves.
Yeah, it's just the type of thing that's like, your like parents or teachers would lecture you with, so I never really like took it all that seriously. I didn't realize it had like actual origins.
Hmm. This is one such origin, probably the origin in China at least. Well, maybe okay. I'm not even going to venture to make the claim that Confucius was the first person in China, but this is at least one of the first texts that we have from China where it's expressed. And I'm going to quote two passages, Lun Yu, so the Analect, in
Hmm?
case you forgot. That's where basically where most of our information, if not all of our information on, well, no, not all of it, but where most of our information on Confucius is from the Analect. And
Right.
so Lun Yu 12.2 and 6.30. What you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. And since you yourself desire standing, then help others achieve it. Since you yourself desire success, then help others attain it.
Right.
So it sounds approximately the same thing as do unto others as you would like to be done by. Do you what do you I'm interested in what you think about the golden rule. So if we assume that there would be no, or if we assume that everybody on Earth would act by it, do you think you would become a better place?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a good, like philosophical standard to adhere to. I feel like if everyone like, I mean, it depends how literally we mean it, but if everyone adhered to it, I guess you can't really argue that the world would be a worse place unless everyone just wants to be, yeah, unless everyone's just like a massive masochist.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's basically the sort of situation where it breaks apart is when or at least according to the criticisms of it, the first ones, even more recent ones, is in situations where somebody is a huge masochist, as you put it, that's mildly problematic if everybody adhered by this rule.
Right, yeah. Or if someone just like, if somebody wrongs you, it's if you follow the rule, then you're gonna have to wrong them if you want them to be wrong. If they like did something to you, and it just creates like a feedback loop. Obviously, that's if we're taking this like fully
Massively.
literally. If we're taking this as a philosophical standard, it's a lot more reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like when somebody does something to you, do it to them. Like how you would want people to treat you, treat others, and then that's like constant.
Right.
But yeah, there's guy called Ian Benjamin King. Ian spelt Iaian, which confused me at first. I had to look up the
What?
pronunciation. And
Fascinating.
this isn't some crazy historical figure. This guy's alive right now. He's
Oh,
a British philosopher and writer.
can we get him on the
In his
show?
Ian, if you're out there, probably not. In his he in his 2008 book, How to Make Good Decisions and Be Right All the Time,
Oh,
he says, and I quote, "Some fanatics have no aversion to death. The golden rule might inspire them to kill others in suicide missions."
right. That's like that
So
kind of
that's
that reminds me of
yep,
like
that
the suicide by cop, which is becoming popular nowadays. Where you just like commit a crime and then like it mostly popular in America, where you just like commit a crime and then you just like wave a weapon at like policemen and they're essentially forced to shoot you.
whoa, what?
You incriminate yourself. You get in front of like an American policeman and you present yourself as a danger, and it's just like obviously they're gonna shoot. So
And the point of that is what?
suicide,
Oh, okay.
because there you're like you can't turn back. It's kind of like jumping off a bridge. If you like present yourself as a danger, someone else has to do it for you.
Oh, wow, I see. Okay, that's actually very interesting. I haven't heard of it before. Okay, maybe that's something we can discuss later.
Right.
Yep. So, but anyway, that's one famous criticism. Well, semi-famous. I wouldn't say it's super famous. Um, Another one is Immanuel Kant. Him you've probably heard of.
Hmm?
He criticized the golden rule for not being sensitive to differences of situation, noting that a prisoner duly convicted of a crime could appeal to the golden rule while asking the judge to release him, pointing out that the judge would not want anyone else to send him to prison, so he shouldn't do so to others. I wouldn't want to be sent to prison. I shouldn't send other people to prison then.
that
Even if I had committed a crime, would I want to be sent to prison?
that
Would I
is
want someone to send me to prison? No.
that is an argument. I don't know about the efficiency of said argument.
I mean, it just points out that universality of the rule
Right. Yeah.
supposedly breaks down.
Of course, that's a lot of that's like the problem with a lot of like universal rules. You can't like put a simple stable like rule into philosophy because things are situational. There are multiple different cases for multiple different situations, and you can't just like prescribe one rule to it rather than like don't be a bad person. Like
Yeah.
then you go into the whole problem
So
of
what's
what.
bad?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to go into. Then you go into the problem of what is the definition of a bad person? What exactly is bad? What's bad by your moral compass is something that could be not bad or acceptable by someone else's moral compass.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And that's what a lot of ethics, morality is about. What is good or bad, and how can we even know that? Um, anyway, this since you mentioned that Kant's criticism there, maybe a little bit specific, so not the most powerful argument. This one might be more to your tastes, and it was by George Bernard Shaw in the 1800s.
Mhm.
He said, "Do not do unto others as you would that they should do unto you. Their tastes may be different." So the idea being that people have different values, so the way you want to be treated isn't gonna be the same they want to be treated necessarily or even probably.
Right.
So, anyway, there are responses to those criticisms, and it gets really complex. I'm gonna, as again, everything in philosophy is argued about. I'm just gonna mention one. So Jeffrey Wattles, if I pronounce that wrong, so sorry, pointed out that the golden rule may be self-correcting if you apply it to your own method of using it. So in effect, you're asking if we want if we would want other people to apply the golden rule in ways that ignore taste or situation against us, in which case the answer would typically be no. Like, would we want other people to utilize the golden rule against us in a way that ignores my tastes and the situation?
Right.
And the idea is, well, that typically would be no, so then we shouldn't use the golden rule in such ways. And then supposedly it might be like this self-correction going on, which I guess would make it like a perfect rule. Well, obviously only under the premise that it, everybody thinks rationally.
Yeah, I was just gonna go into that.
Everybody,
It's the
yeah,
perfect rule if you apply it correctly. But the problem is applying it correctly isn't just a matter of okay, I guess I'll do that. I mean, emotion comes into play.
yeah,
Rationality comes into
exactly.
play. Logical, conclusions. With that person, like if I did, I'm not sure. I can't exactly know that either.
hmm And some people, well, there's no reason for them to accept that it's beneficial to me to be treating other people this way. It's just like a rule of thumb, you know? Oh, okay, so I treat you well and then you beat my ass. Okay, thanks, you know?
Thanks, buddy. Real
So
nice of you.
it would only supposedly it's only beneficial if everybody, uses it.
Right?
And
Yeah, of
and
course. And that's
and even
like,
then, that might mean that one person, well, yeah, I mean, everybody would have to use it unconditionally.
yeah,
And
exactly.
even
That's the problem of
yeah, and
like,
even then you need to subscribe to like s you need to have some kind of moral philosophy in which that's even a good thing that everybody's uh but I think most people would agree on that. That
yeah, exactly.
being treated well by others is nice.
Yeah, it's it's
Um
it's like the problem of communism. It's only good on paper if everyone follows it,
yeah, but I mean you simply can't do that. You can't force everyone to follow it or
and you can't.
you're already breaking it
Yeah,
probably.
and you probably can't like coerce everyone in the world to do it either.
Mhm. But anyway, that's interesting. One man who already pointed out the golden rule well before the hypothetical birth and death of Christ. Anyway, so let's continue about Confucianism.
Hmm?
So, yep, something that is central to all the ethical teachers in the Analect is this notion that the social arena in which the tools for creating and maintaining harmonious relations with other people uh, is the is the extended family. So in your family, in your extended family, that's the arena in which you try to maintain harmonious relations and learn to do that elsewhere.
Right. I guess.
It's
Yeah, I
mhm.
guess I understand what you mean there. Yeah. I
Yeah,
guess
it's
that's
hard to put into words, I suppose.
yeah, I guess that's less the case today because we have like elementary schools and everything, and kindergartens where children can socialize and learn
Yeah.
socializing. But yeah,
So,
yeah, I
the
go ahead.
so to expand on that, um, Confucius states that devotion to your parents and older siblings is the basic form of promoting the interests of others before one's own, Ren, benevolence. Like one example of that, and the basic form of it is your devotion to your parents, your respect for your older siblings, promoting their interest before your own. And as he basically asserts that the most important social division is multi-generational lineages. Your lineages are the most important social division before, I don't know, class or ideology.
I feel like I hear we're going into more like the type of topic of just like values and traditionalism. Like
Hmm.
back in obviously a lot of history, families were very important to the people. Obviously, like families were held in a much higher standard in back in history of like devotion towards each other than they are
Yeah,
nowadays, where friendship is more prevalent.
yeah. I'm sure you've heard the saying. Well, actually, what is the saying?
Blood of the covenant
Blood.
is thicker than the water of the womb.
Yeah, exactly. Blood of the covenants is thicker than the water of the womb, which is sometimes mistakenly
Yeah,
simplified to blood is thicker than water.
yeah, the exact opposite.
The exact opposite point.
That happens a lot, doesn't it?
It it does actually. Cu is curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back, one example of that. I don't know if that's the original or not, but I think it but even if that's not a valid example, I feel like it does happen very often. Like you can come up with them.
Jack of all
This is
trades.
such a situation. Exactly. Jack of all trades. Okay. So so Confucius and his yeah, I mean you probably got this idea from what I was or maybe you could have guessed that it was gonna come here um because because he was into like I mentioned that in addition to Ren and benevolence you have Li, propriety. So and he values like all these and this and his what he considers antiquity. So he values traditions and he values rituals and family is something that we traditionally consider um something that ties into those concepts.
Right, yeah. I'm sure back in like the older days, philosophers didn't really take personal values as much into consideration.
Mm, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the time, a lot of the well, I mean, certainly some of them, but I feel like a lot of the time, that's exactly all they did take into consideration. All they were trying to purport that their personal values were the superior personal values.
Okay, yeah, but that's like exactly what I mean. They didn't take the into consideration the fact that everyone has their own personal values,
Oh, that's
and
what you
they,
mean,
and they
right?
run
I
their
see.
philosophy based off of their own.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, they have their personal values, and then they're trying to demonstrate why their personal values should be the personal values everyone has.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that was probably pretty problematic back in the day.
Um, I mean,
Other than the
in
whole
what way?
killing and dying to deceive.
Killing yeah, that
I feel like those are bigger historical concerns.
those are pretty big historical concerns. I don't know if they were necessarily well, a lot of the time they were caused by ideology, so I guess I understand that.
Right? Yeah, I guess.
So So in Confucius' opinion, the most fundamental lessons to be learned by individuals within a lineage were what role their generational position had imposed on them, and what obligations towards those senior or junior to them were associated with those roles. So family, what roles you have, are super important. It basically in the world of the analect, the dynamics of social exchange and obligation were primarily between the familial roles.
Right.
So
Yeah. It.
how you relate to each other within the same lineage.
Yeah. Basically, a lot of focus on your position within the family.
Yeah, and of course it was necessary so that one plays roles within other social constructs like the neighborhood and community, political bureaucracy, and even like specifically school of thought. That brings one in like those. It's necessary to play roles in those, and that brings you into contact with a larger network of acquaintances, and creates ethical issues that go well beyond those that impact one's family. But supposedly, the idea is that the extended family is at the center of all these other hierarchies, and could be regarded as. Look, I corrected
Hierarchies.
myself. I corrected myself, so it's fine.
And tell me more about
And
the hierarchies.
and could be yeah, I'm telling you about the hierarchies right now. Go away.
The hierarchies.
The hierarchies, exactly. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, but the idea is that the extended family is at the center of all of those and could be regarded as a microcosm of their workings. So a smaller version of how they go about functioning. A demonstration that you can apply to them.
Right. Yeah. So that.
So more or less in Confucius's view, someone who behaves morally in all possible parallel structures extending outward from the family probably approximated his conception of Ren, of benevolence. So, and this brings me to Mois,
What?
because we haven't talked about anything but Confucianism so far.
Oh, right. Yeah. The opponent. We should probably talk about that.
Exactly, the main intellectual competition
Getting two sides of the
Confucius's
story.
ideas.
Getting both sides of the story. Pff, who needs that? Unbiased argument. That's not what we're about here.
No, not at all. We care about cognitive biases and heuristics. We're going to impose only one viewpoint on you. This is propaganda.
Exactly.
I don't think propaganda would usually admit that it's propaganda.
Unless it's it's wine in front of me propaganda.
Ah, yes.
It's yeah, exactly. It's very smart. It's you see we're not propaganda because we're telling you we're propaganda. See, it's not propaganda. Therefore, you should follow us. You
Right.
should follow our
If we were telling you we're propaganda, then I mean propaganda would never tell you it's propaganda.
yeah. See, therefore follow our every word.
But okay, let's contrast that idea of a Ren, of benevolence, with that advocated by Mois. They were founded by one Mosey. Okay, I'm probably pronouncing all of this so wrong, but it's fine. Mozi. How would you pronounce that?
Uh,
Mosey?
um, Mosey, Mosey.
Mosey?
I don't know.
Mo? Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and he was born about within a decade of when Confucius died. And he made this basically as indirect competition to Confucius's ideas. Is this idea in Moism of uh
毛子，
Gen
毛
I. Yeah,
子，
I can't pronounce this.
It's Mozart.
Impartial
Yeah.
Chinese words,
Hold
which
on. Pause for 2
yeah.
seconds.
毛
Mhm.
子，
Motsu.
Motsu.
Yes,
Okay.
it just played an audio clip.
All right, of course. And this Chen I. Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing this is how you pronounce this. Jian space AI.
Yeah, sure, go.
Gen I. Gen. Yeah, I don't. I'm not Chinese. It's fine. So that was his idea. It translates to about impartial care or impartial love, which is what they advocate. And so the Moists, they shared the goal of bringing about effective governance and a stable society, but they constructed their ethical system on the universality of caring rather than the basis of social roles. So Motsu believed that the essential problem of human ethics was an excess of partiality or favoritism in compassion rather than a deficit of it. So directly contrasts with what Confucius is saying, where you're supposed to show favoritism in compassion to your family.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's
I get what you mean. One's like a family man. The other one's like a not so family man. Exactly what I was talking about, like friendship and just like everyone around you.
yeah, exactly. Like Confucians do believe that love should be unconditional. They didn't believe it should be indiscriminate. Children should hold greater love for their parents than for random strangers, right? But Motsu was known for his insistence that all people are equally deserving of receiving material benefit and being protected from physical harm. These things associated with something that society gives you.
Right. Yeah. This is probably actually something that's like a lot of problem in a lot of ancient philosophy is the idea of like children, for example, having to have unconditional love towards their parents no matter what they're like. I'm sure that created a lot of family dilemma where parents
Hmm.
were less than favorable, and there was like a held standard that they should be. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that was like, and going into the whole multi thing, that's probably like a thing that was questionable there too. I feel like a counter argument that for that could be if someone is not a very nice person, then you probably shouldn't be all that nice to them in return.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, in a lot of cases, when we're talking about philosophy, we are sort of assuming that this is the superior way of thinking, but it only works on the condition that everybody's that way,
Yeah, we've
right?
gone
This
back
is
to the
this
same
is
problem. We've come full
yeah,
circle.
we've come full circle. So on the condition, like if they're not a very nice person, then they're not abiding by this thought process, and if they were, then there would be no problem. The problem doesn't exist that you describe, right?
Right,
But okay, so in Moism, morality is defined not by tradition and ritual and uh, like family structures. He specifically argues against family and clan structures with this moral guide that's very similar to utilitarianism.
right,
You love yourself and you love everyone equally. So you want maximum benefit uh, to everyone. You don't show favoritism in how you're giving that benefit. Like helping my father do X is superior than is more important than helping two strangers do X. Right? That doesn't exist in Moism.
right.
So he believe yeah that so uh
But
but there are different kinds of
but
utilitarianism.
wait, hold on. In your example, wouldn't it be more beneficial to wouldn't it be more right to help the two strangers rather than the father because there's two people?
Yeah, in Moism, in utilitarianism, yeah.
Right.
But in Confucianism, it gets more complicated because you value the family structure. You're supposed to be more loving towards your parents.
How do you make this
Your parent
moral?
needs
How do you?
your parent needs help, and you're gonna not help him. You're gonna leave him in trouble and instead favor two strangers.
Yeah, how do you
That
make
doesn't
this?
really exist in
How do you make
Confucianism.
this moral calculation?
You don't. I mean, even in general, utilitarianism is pretty difficult to accurately weigh what the consequences of your action are to everyone. It's pretty challenging. You can't tell the future. But
Not with that attitude.
Moism is utility judged based on consequentialism in regard to order, material wealth, and increase in population, with material wealth referring to basic needs like shelter and clothing. And it's interesting how philosophy philosophy reflects in some ways the environment and circumstances of those that those philosophers were living in. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? But if you think about Moses Motsu's era, when war and famines were common, population growth was seen as a moral necessity for a harmonious society.
So they had a lot of babies.
So they were like having a lot of babies is a good thing because we need to survive. There's war and famine. We need population growth.
Right, so that's probably a good reason to support the family structure.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, he does in Mohism you do judge, like I just said, a consequentialism in regard to increasing population in one way, and family structures would would influence that. So in so far, it seems Mohism is a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
But
I was just gonna say. This sounds like a bit of a better alternative.
mm, but it also means that it gets very well. All of these are very complicated. It's very complex to make those judgments.
Are you going?
How does what I do?
Are you trying to tell me that philosophy is complicated?
No, philosophy is very simple. You
Oh,
can yeah, you can basically learn it all in one day.
oh yeah, probably.
Nah, now that I think about it.
Yeah, why are we even making multiple episodes? We could just make like 1 3 hour series. Boom, we've solved philosophy. Did it.
Good point.
We saved the world.
This seems like a vastly superior technique. Okay, but I have a quote from a Stanford sinologist. Do you know what a sinologist is?
No,
The clue is in the name. Sino,
they make
Sino.
signs.
No, that's a prefix that means like Chinese.
Make signs.
Yeah, this guy studies China. Stanford sinologist David Shepard Nivison. I'm just all over the place with the names in this episode. Wrote in the Cambridge History of Ancient China that the moral goods of Moism, so basic wealth and these things, are interrelated. When you have more wealth, you have more reproduction, and that leads to more people, which then leads to more production and more wealth.
Science booth.
And, and that's like at least +4 science in Civ 5.
Yep. Yeah, see, I'm telling you, Civ 5 is useful for any facet of history.
Yep,
Yep.
basic. I mean, you're not. I mean, it's useful. I'm sure it contributes to some extent. You could definitely find some usefulness in it. I wouldn't say it's like the most efficient way of learning about older civilizations.
Oh,
But
that's
now
your
that we've,
opinion.
that is my opinion. And now that we've talked to some extent about the what Moists think, let's get back to Confucianism. We talked about Ren, which is the first aspect of benevolence. Then we're going to move on to Li, which is the principle of gain, benefit, order, propriety. Turns out translations are difficult, so we have all these words. It's the concrete guide to human action. Yep. So Confucius also taught that the practice of altruism, he thought necessary for social cohesion, could be mastered only by those who have learned self-discipline. So learning self-restraint would involve studying and mastering Li, the ritual forms and rules of propriety through which one expresses respect for superiors, but primarily you're enacting your role in society in such a way that you yourself appear worthy of respect and admiration, right? And I think this is also very interesting to look at these things because it's what are the benefits of say um acting gentlemanly in public. And I mean things that don't necessarily appear to have any other point than propriety, like not swearing.
Well, I mean, obviously, there's the aspect of, being respectful gives you respect. Respect is generally a good thing to have in society. Uh, it's good for your reputation. It tells the a very positive character trait to have. You know, gentlemanliness. Just
Mhm.
it's the benefits of being gentlemanly is we go back to golden rule. You know, people tend to treat you more like
Yeah. I mean, and in general, when you have, if you can gain people's respect and admiration, they're also, um, y- you're also going to have more influence over them because they care about what you think whatsoever. But it is interesting that in society, things that uh, I mean don't appear to be harmful in any way, such as swearing, would have any kind of stigma against it. Well, like, nowadays, there's less of a stigma when adults do it. Um, but I mean, obviously, there's still that for children.
right. Yeah,
Seems mildly inconsistent.
yeah. Back when I was in the daycare for a week, there was one kid there who was swearing like all the time, and you could just see all of the kindergarten teachers flip out at the same time every time.
Yeah. Yeah, and, well, I can come up with one reason why you'd want children to swear less than you would adults, and that's, um, the child is still acquiring vocabulary and is still learning how to speak. So it's gonna influence their dialogue, their how they learn to express themselves and their verbosity when they have these filler words and that sort of what have you called it in the past?
Uh,
Strengthening in some
yeah,
way?
that's what I was gonna say. Like swear words, a lot of swear words are very like accentuating. They really like get your point across. If you're, if you're not someone who uses them every other word, then it's something that can really affect, obviously the meaning or force of your
Mm.
sentence, the message you're trying to get across. It's
So all
it represents like
right.
a sense of urgency and a sense of like importance. Well,
Yeah.
also because it's like you really just say that.
Yeah. Although, I mean, in that case, that, at least the way you just characterized it, it's sort of, because of the social stigma that it has that power. But yeah.
Right, yeah. There was a anecdote I read recently on Reddit where like somewhere around World War One there was, I don't remember exactly which side, but there were like soldiers, I think German or English, something like that. English soldiers that would swear so often that it was actually considered more important when someone said something without swearing. Like, get your effing guns. It's like, oh, there's probably just some sort of like nuisance at the gate, whereas it's like, get your guns. It's like,
Yeah.
everyone just goes into like a sense of fear because it's like, oh god, what are we being attacked by?
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, that's actually interesting.
Of course, that's an anecdote. Have any sources to confirm
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, of course. But we're going off on a tangent again.
Right, yeah.
So let's return and look at another passage from Lunyum. This time 12.1. Look at nothing in defiance of ritual. Listen to nothing in defiance of ritual. Speak of nothing in defiance of ritual. Never stir hand or foot in defiance of ritual.
That sounds very.
That's very that's very powerful advice. Doesn't give much leeway there. Even and I mean, again, the question comes, how do you interpret it, right? Because
Right.
if you just look at the word ritual here, you go, okay, so even if the ritual is bad, even if it's an age-old tradition of um
Sacrifice.
of human sacrifice, I'm not allowed to the hand or foot in defiance of it.
Yeah.
That's so. How do you interpret ritual here? Well, I guess you can only really take it in the sense that he means just day to day, um, how behavior.
Right, yeah.
And that's really the only way you can consider this. But even then, it's interesting because I'm how
Very
much he
heavy.
stresses ceremony and such.
Yeah, it's very heavy. It's very hard. It's put across in a very hard way. Like, yeah, you know, when they repeat essentially the same thing multiple times, it's like, oh boy.
Yeah. Then nothing. Look at nothing. Listen to nothing, and they keep it gets stronger and stronger with every repetition. Well, eventually, of course, it would grow old, but a standard rhetorical tool, repetition. Now, it's worth mentioning that Confucianism doesn't mean that you should suppress your desires, but it does mean that you have to reconcile them with the needs of your family and community. So, by experiencing desires, we're supposed to learn the value of social structures that make an ordered society possible somehow.
Pure altruism would again have the problem of everyone has to do it. So you know that's like
Yeah, uh, altruism is interesting because I mean, I uh, don't particularly subscribe to it myself because I care about my life. So again, it's as you said,
wow,
if
wow, Nikki, you're
everybody did
so
it,
selfish.
if everybody did it, at least they care for me in return, right? So
Yeah,
that's as you
exactly.
said.
Yeah, if you had pure altruism, then everyone would be taking care of everyone. It'd be a bit weird in terms of social boundaries, but you know, it would be slightly one of us, one of us. Tiny bit of hive mind going on here.
That would be extremely interesting. Okay. Um, so I mean, even though Confucius was supposedly not a um like the ceremonialist, in the sense that he thinks rites of worship and social exchange have to be practiced correctly at all costs. Um, it does seem that he very much stresses it. He has this insistence that the rites shouldn't be regarded as mere forms, but they have to be practiced with complete devotion and sincerity. And I have another quote for you. Lunyu 3.12. He, i.e., Confucius, sacrificed to the dead as if they were present. He sacrificed to the spirits as if the spirits were present. The master said, I consider my not being present at the sacrifice as though there were no sacrifice.
Hmm.
If a tree falls in the forest and nobody sees it or nobody hears it, does it make a sound?
Question doesn't make sense. Yes, that's a but there's nobody to observe it. It still makes sound. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I've never understood that argument. I mean, obviously it still makes sounds. The physics still works. Sound waves still travel, even though nobody's there to hear it. I guess there's some quantum theory that like things require observation, but that would not really make any sense. Why is it intrinsically necessary that we need to observe something with human eyes? What is that? What makes vision observation such a special?
Yeah, that's one misinterpretation that some people have of quantum mechanics,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
that observing something with your eyes has an impact. The point is that uh, at least when it comes to things like the double slit experiment, where you're firing photons or electrons, I don't remember,
Yeah,
through
the
two slits. Yeah, against some surface, right? And then the point of observation having an impact there is that necessarily when taking a measurement, that measuring device influences the experiment. Is the idea there?
I mean,
So the in that you're affecting the experiment by trying to take a measurement because your measuring device has to interact with it somehow, supposedly.
right? Yeah, there's no. I mean, I guess there's no like conclusive answer until he measures that answer.
Yeah, it's very weird, and we don't need to get into it.
This is not a science podcast. That Confucius, the Bobaju.
hmm that's just about it for Confucius' social philosophy. Is this benevolence and propriety?
Right.
He had some small views, or small views. He had some views on political philosophy, which is primarily just that that a ruler should abide by, or should also abide by his social philosophy. The ruler should treat his people with love and concern.
Right.
I can probably summarize it in just uh one quote. So Lunyu 2.3. If the people be led by laws, and uniformity among them be sought by punishments, they will try to escape punishments and have no sense shame. If they are led by virtue, and uniformity sought among them through the practice of ritual propriety, they will possess a sense of shame and come to you of their own accord.
Yes. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
I have, in my opinion, I mean, if the people are led by laws, if they still agree with those laws, and yeah, I don't know, it's weird. It's weird. Would you escape punishment, have no sense of shame if you broke a law that you morally agreed with?
That's yeah. I mean, that is a good question. If I morally agreed with the law and I broke it, and I obviously I feel like I would feel a sense of shame because
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, I disagree that it's possible for the people to be led by laws and still, abide by them and accept punishment that's meted out to them and have a sense of shame. But I understand that a leader, if or in order to abide by the leader or follow the leader's rule, you need to be able to agree with him and recognize that he is somebody worth being led by. So in that sense, uh,
yeah, I guess in like the older times that would make more sense. You know, obviously the like rulers and leaders were held higher than they are now. So
yeah.
it's hard to imagine right now, but I feel like back in the day it would have been a lot more reasonable that people looked up
Hmm.
to a ruler as sort of like a god king figure.
Yeah. And if the ruler doesn't act properly, doesn't practice benevolence or propriety, well, the people are gonna be like, "What the hell, dude?"
Yeah, they're gonna get disillusioned
They
by said god king view of them, and
gonna riot.
they're gonna riot. They're gonna break laws. They're gonna do things that they find that they don't morally agree with, even though the ruler does.
Hmm. But it's worth mentioning that in Confucius's day, the advocates of more legalistic methods were winning a large following among the ruling elite, especially. So Confucius's warning here about the ill consequences of law codes should less be interpreted as an attempt to prevent their adoption than as his laments that his ideas about the morality of rulers were very popular. So there's that. I mean, he was of this opinion, but people weren't particularly agreeing with him at the time.
Case with a lot of history.
And yeah, I definitely. So and he believes that this rulers having this the following his these rules of propriety and self-discipline and benevolence would solve issues that he considered to be in society, such as, or well, in politics, that for example, he had this perception that the political institutes of his day had completely broken down, and that this was because those who wielded power and those who occupied subordinate positions did so by making claim to titles for which they weren't worthy.
Right. They were basing their power more off their own like roles authority rather than their own character
Hmm.
as roles.
Yep, and especially trying to sort of gain more power that you're not worthy
Yeah,
of wielding,
that
right?
you're not deserving of.
Yeah, you're trying to boost your own standings, but you don't actually know exactly how to use that added power, and then problems occur.
Yeah, exactly. Going for power for the sake of power rather than power because you're ready for it.
Yeah, and that happens today as well.
Yeah, of course. I was gonna say we totally don't see any examples of that now.
Nope.
No, what? No.
Nope.
Our,
Not even let's not even get
our
into that
look,
right
our
now.
leaders are very incredibly double plus on good.
Our leaders are very qualified to be leading.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but probably the hallmark of Confucius' thoughts was his emphasis on education and study. So this is what we're gonna discuss last here, because Confucius was very much a lover of education.
Right?
He doesn't he dislikes those that have faith in natural understanding or intuition. He
Ah,
argues that the only real understanding of a subject comes from long and careful study. Ah,
okay, well,
I'm out of water.
boy. Now we're going into something I think we can both agree on more.
Yeah. So basically, people aren't very good intuitively at things unless they have already studied that subject and become experts in it. Then their intuition and quick thinking, sort of automatic thought processes, become very accurate.
Right, of course. That does make sense, yeah. I mean, if you're going off an intuition on something you've never done before, then
Hmm.
obviously, I mean, intuition is just that. It's automatic thinking. And if you don't know how to think
Exactly.
about that thing and you go off that intuition that doesn't know anything, you're just going to mess everything up.
Yep. Yeah, I've been reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And that's exactly about the two systems of thinking, like fast thinking and slow thinking.
Yeah,
And specifically about the heuristics and biases we experience in making shortcuts in our intuitive thought. People aren't very good intuitively at, say, statistics, specifically, but also other aspects. And just by far the only the way you reach real understanding is definitely long and careful study. Now, of course, his Confucius's position on like tradition, or rather on tradition and ritual, is apparent here as well. So he mentions that the best way to study is by finding a good teacher and imitating his words and deeds, and that a good teacher is someone older who's familiar with the ways of the past and the practices of the ancient.
Elder.
Yeah. So that aspect of his philosophy is apparent in that sense as well.
Right, yeah.
And this is interesting. He does point out uh I don't know, it feels like a fairly nuanced, well, not a fairly nuanced. He points out this interesting uh so something that we talk about today as well. So like memorization
Hmm.
and inefficient learning and efficient learning. I feel like he pointed this out in a way about between like learning and reflecting on what you've learned and thinking about it. And just hold on a second. I'm going to read this quote. So, Lunyu 2.15. He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger. And to me, that's what that seems to characterize.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense. I feel like that's definitely what he was going for. I don't really see any other form of interpretation on that.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's some in part the criticism that people have of like educational systems today as well is that, well, you just make people memorize something and then they remember it for one day, regurgitate it in an exam, and then forget about it.
Yeah,
They're not
exactly.
actually exercising critical thinking.
Yeah, you make people learn without thinking, and they learn that thing and they put it on the paper and they forget about it.
Hmm. And his opinion on that is apparent in how he teaches. So his students, he's got interesting methods. So he never discourses at length on a subject. He doesn't like lecture. Instead, he poses questions, cites passages from classics, uses apt analogies, and waits for his students to arrive at the right answers themselves.
Right. Yeah, that does sound a lot more efficient, but
Yeah, like,
that would
mhm.
also require, a lot more teachers per student ratio.
Yeah, of course. It's challenging in a modern educational institution, but it is how, when I'm tutoring someone or trying to teach someone something, it's more or less what I strive for is this. It's sort of the Eastern version of or at least, I
The
haven't studied
Socratic
much
method.
Eastern philosophy, but of the sort of Eastern version of the Socratic method.
Yeah.
Yeah, like through through this constructive questioning and you sort of try to reach an answer. So instead of telling someone the answer, you ask them questions and make them find it themselves, and it's way more efficient in my experience.
Right. Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, you're forcing them to think about the problem, and you're giving them the pressure of coming up with the solution.
Hmm. Um, would you like to take a look at what he teaches us?
What? Repeat that?
Would you like to take a look at what Confucius would teach his students?
Sure.
Okay. So he would teach morality, proper speech, government, and the refined arts. He emphasizes the six arts, being ritual, music, archery, chariot riding, calligraphy, and computation. To assume that's like mathematics. But it's clear that he regards morality as the most important subject.
Yeah.
For the reason that he thinks that solves issues in society.
Yeah, it's interesting that morality is in the same category as like archery.
Yeah, he teaches archery and he teaches morality. They're, they're not mutually exclusive. Yeah, nowadays you wouldn't see that so often that one person can teach all these different things
You
because
wouldn't, yeah,
there's so
exactly.
much specialization.
You don't really have many joint morality and archery classes anymore nowadays. Mostly because
Well,
one of those two things is slightly obsolete.
yeah, slightly. Well, but uh,
Competitively.
yeah, people
People,
do archery.
yeah, competitive
Archery is a
archery.
not just competitively, but for fun. They go to like archery ranges and do some archery.
Yeah, of course. When
But
when
in the end, his goal was to create gentlemen who carry themselves with grace, speak correctly, and demonstrate integrity in all things. He had a strong dislike of those that win an audience by manipulating words through arrogance and in a pretentious manner. I guess modern day politicians.
uh
In his
appeal to
in
emotion.
his appeal to emotion. Yeah, but I mean, in his view, those who mastered like benevolence, part of that was concern for others. So speaking in a simple manner and slowly, so that everybody understands, is important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like the misleading of others through the power of emotion and like arrogance would obviously not be very benevolent at all.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I can get behind that viewpoint. So we can't. It's been interesting discussing all these things, but we don't have that much to compare it to yet. So I look forward to next week and looking at ancient Greek philosophy, so we can sort of begin to compare and contrast and see what things we agree with in different philosophies.
Right, yeah, this is definitely going to be a great episode to reflect on if we're going to do Greek philosophy, because Greek philosophy is the one we really know more. So
Hmm.
having this as like a reflective point is very interesting. So and
Yeah, I mean,
it's also a
it
great way to
happened
get
roughly at the same time,
it's also a great way to get people to watch episode 3 to get watch episode 2, right?
and
Brilliant.
vice
It's
versa.
yeah, exactly 10,000 IQ.
So thank you to everyone who's watched this episode. Um,
All zero of you.
zero of you. That's an awfully negative stance to take, but it's completely plausible.
Don't worry, we're big shots. We're
Yeah, we'll pull it off. So in
let's
more or
get
less of a recap,
let's get Socrates on the show.
let's get so I hope we can get an interview with Socrates.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Can we get? Oh! I've just received news that we actually have a surprise guest on our episode today. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Confucius.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna get in. We're gonna talk to Confucius to get that
Hello,
first-hand
hello. I'm
experience.
Confucius. Me, Mr. Confucius. I'm here
Hmm.
to confuse.
But again, obviously, if we had Confucius here today, he would have completely different viewpoints. I assume because it's just a completely different environment.
Right? Yeah, of course.
So in that sense, like I alluded to previously, or like I mentioned, it is interesting how philosophy is molded by the environment of the philosophers.
Right? Yeah, of course. Always, it's definitely situational, and like I said earlier, it's definitely based a lot on the philosophers' personal values. And back in the day, they didn't consider other people's personal values that much, and how they could differ from person.
Yeah, and that's one example of it, of how things maybe changed to some extent. I'm sure some people took it into account, and I'm sure there are people nowadays that don't. But I maybe not that many. Probably only people who are specifically trying to talk about what the best world would be if everyone had the same value. What the best values would it be? So, yeah, like I said, in more or less of a quick recap, we talked about the 100 schools of thought and the period when that was happening. So this was about 500 BC ish, and onwards from there. In ancient China, we talk about Confucius's Analect a lot. His social philosophy, which was based on the twin concepts of Ren and Li, how those concepts compared to Moism, which seemed a bit more of a nuanced viewpoint, maybe more. I feel like something that people could get behind a bit more nowadays because tradition is and like family structures aren't as valued.
Right? Yeah, that definitely right now seems the more favorable.
Hmm. And then we went back to Confucianism. We talked a little bit about his political philosophy, his views on rulers and on education.
Yep.
And
Put that in your pipe and
but remember that. I hope this has been educational.
next time. Bye.